And a very good evening to you. I am Lisa Lord, and my special guest on this special program is a gentleman that many Barbadians grew to know over the last 4.5 years. Former senior economic advisor to the Barbados government, Dr. Kevin Greenidge. Dr. Greenidge, thank you so much for joining us, albeit remotely.
Good evening, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Now, we should start by telling viewers that you are already back in Washington, D.C., as you will be officially resuming your duties with the International Monetary Fund as senior economist from tomorrow, New Year's Day, January 1st. Now, as you resume your duties with the IMF, I want us to look back at your stint with the Barbados government. You came in at a very critical time when we were facing a very serious situation with our economy. Take us back through those early days back in 2018.
Okay, so as you correctly said, I joined the team at the beginning of, well, in July 2018. Um, I took leave without pay to join the team for initially 2 years. And as most persons will appreciate, the Caribbean Development Bank finance my my assignment. They paid my wages. When we joined the team, but I was kind of familiar with what prior to that because being at the IMF, we keep abreast of things. But I found what we would say an economic storm in terms of the major big four problems that countries experience in terms of economic problems. We had it all together in one island, in one go. We had high debt, 176% of GDP, 18 billion. We had no reserves, so we had like $420 million in the central bank, which is less than about 4 weeks or so. We had a fiscal problem where government was unable to running fiscal deficit average of 7%, had arrears about 1.9 billion, and we had the economy had grown for a number of years. The four main problems we usually don't find them together. You probably have an exchange rate problem or growth problem. So we had to design a program that will address all three of those problems. And we had to do it in very quick time because um, we literally ran out. We didn't have enough at the central bank to cover the payments that were coming due in July, debt payments, to cover the all payments that was going to be due kind of around October, November, and to prepare for hiking season. So you had to get a program going so quickly that would be endorsed by the International Monetary Fund and supported through an arrangement, enough time for us to get funds from the International Monetary Fund to help us, but that also will allow for other development partners like IDB and CAF and persons to come on board and assist. So we put our heads down early, the team, and we developed perhaps one of the fastest negotiated programs. In 3 months, we were able to, on October the 1st, the IMF went to the board supporting extended funds facility to support the Barbados Economic and Recovery Program, the BERT program, which is now called BERT 2018.
Okay, so that BERT program, as you said, it was conceptualized in a short period of time back in 2018. And that plan was supposed to place the economy on a path of strong, sustainable, and inclusive growth while safeguarding the financial and social sectors. Now, included in the BERT was the suspension of payments due on debt owed to external commercial creditors and a comprehensive domestic and external debt restructuring plan. Did the first BERT program perform to its expectations?
I, in my view, I said perform beyond expectations. If you so we were so yes. So first of all, in terms of debt restructuring, when the fiscal problems were so large and they were so wide that not close the gap in the fiscal sustainability and debt sustainability without a debt restructuring. It was not possible. And proactively, it is better for a person to creditors and say, look, let's come to the table and talk, than for the creditors to come knocking and you can't pay. At that point, the government took a position and said that pause the debt shrink and call all to the table and let's negotiate how we move forward. That process at the external side was completed by December 2018, and then the domestic was completed a bit later in the next year. The overall debt restructuring, and then the work on the fiscal. So we were able to, prior to COVID, and that's why it was extremely successful, because prior to COVID, we brought the debt from 176% of GDP to 117%, from 18 billion to 13, just about 12 and a half, 13 billion prior to COVID. We have cleared all the external, all the arrears from 1.9 billion. We only had like 63 million, 35 on SOE side, another 30 somebody on the central government side. And we had ran two primary surpluses again, which helps to pay down the debt. So we built back the reserves to about 3 billion, and the importance of that is because the exchange rate was no longer under threat. So fixing those three of the four problems I told you about meant that we were in a position that when COVID struck, government could respond proactively and provide support to households, support to businesses, support the best program where government spent, even though government lost $600 million in revenues from what was expected to get, we're able to step up expenditures to about another 300 million in both years, each year, to deal with the COVID response and provide the Barbadian a response that was perhaps one of the best response in the world in terms of being able to protect its citizens. No one lost their jobs on the government side. Well, the best program ensured that the loss on the hotel sectors, etc., was minimized. Persons got, so the point is, we fixed those problems up to the COVID period by any stretch of the imagination, and an amazing accomplishment. COVID then, of course, put a pause on what you could do. You had to expand the fiscal a bit on the expenditure side, even though the revenues, in order to accommodate what we need. So because of that, and because the economy bottom dropped out, we lost 14% of our economic output, meant that the debt as a ratio of GDP went back up. Now it's about 125%, if you remember the numbers correct. That is a success. It's not, and it's on a downward trajectory where we expect it to go. And I, for one, am not concerned about that, because first of all, it's now $13 billion, it used to be 18 billion. But even in nominal terms, if you look at that, that's 13 billion is not the measure of sustainability. You know, what is important is your ability to service your debt and the debt ratios. The international community look at debt to GDP, 125% and trending down is what we would consider sustainable. Secondly, how much of your debt can you afford to repay? Prior to the BERT program, we were paying 68 cents on the dollar of our tax revenue. So for every dollar in tax revenue the government took in, they paid 68 cents, which left what? 32 cents to do everything, pay wages and salaries, bills and services, support the SOEs, capital, and there you find they don't enough money to do anything, which is why government couldn't invest at that time into growing the economy. Where we are now, we are paying between 28 and 30 cents out of every tax dollar to service debt. In fact, before the COVID, it had fallen to 22 cents. But because we lost the revenues, of course, that ratio changed. And so that means now that you have much more money out of each tax dollar to invest into growing the economy. And you will see that step up in the new BERT program in terms of capital expenditure. The fiscal, sustainable government services, that the only pillar on the original BERT that wasn't achieved at that time was to get growth. And we know what happened because we lost 2 years because of COVID. That's why the new BERT program focuses on getting growth. So back to your original question, in my view, BERT 2018 was a resounding success.
You would have mentioned BERT 2.0 and concerns about debt, and I do want to go back to those. But looking at COVID-19, now it's been well ventilated, the financial nightmare that it created. Are there any buffers that could possibly be created to kind of protect the local economy from any shocks in the future? And I know that's a difficult question.
I don't think you can protect yourself from future pandemic, but they will happen if that's what you mean. But I know you are talking about buffers. You can build resilience. That's what we have been trying to do, and that's what BERT 2.0 is designed to do. Build resilience in terms of we know we will get future shocks, be it a hurricane, another volcano explosion, another public health crisis. You're going to get shocks, and therefore you have to build resilience so that when those shocks occur, you can buffer them somewhat and recover much quicker. Building resilience is on different fronts. On the fiscal, it means that government have to continue to maintain fiscal discipline in terms of fiscal sustainability. So in terms of not adding to being very mindful of what is added as a recurring expenditure, focus more on capital expenditure and invest in the economy, keeping debt at a manageable level, because as COVID has shown us, if a crisis hit, you have to expand your debt. You have to take on some debt to deal with the crisis. What we have done is turn building resilient is that we've built in some buffers in our debt contracts where we have both in our pandemic clause and a natural disaster clause built into debt contracts, so that if a crisis occur again under certain parameters, the governments can suspend, and this is in the contract, so it's not default, and put it on the back end of the payments, and that frees up in collective total right now 18% of GDP, and nobody's going to give you 18% of GDP in debt in a pandemic, because everybody, if it's a global pandemic, everybody trying to take care of themselves. And so we have built some resilience and buffers in our debt contracts, and we continue to do that. We've built space in our debt by bringing it down. We have space in your debt. And then we are also, by spending the capital expenditures in trying to build resilience within the economy, you see the focus in the BERT 2.0 on getting greater food security. Where now you should be able to feed yourself if you get cut off to some degree. So you have the logistic hub, and you also have the local feeding programs, the feed program, the care program, they're non-programs. So you're trying to build resilience that way. Even infrastructure, you're trying to replace your mains, you put it actually on the ground and different things. So you build economic resilience to buffer that. And to do that, we have to get the capital expenditures going, you got to get the growth going, and we got to bring along the private sector. And that's how we build buffers. At the same time, you keep the reserves at a healthy level so that in case, again, you have a shock, you have your money in order to get your imports and do the spending.
No,
So it's
let's
building
focus
climate
on.
resilience. And in fact, I should actually mention that not only is it part of BERT 2.0, but you will know that BERT 2.0 or BERT 2022 is supported by another IMF program,
Yes.
Extended Funds Facility. But the difference this time is that this fund, the IMF has also came up with a new facility called the RST, Resilience and Sustainability Trust, or Facility, FRT, RST. In fact, and everyone knows that Prime Minister has been a major advocate of that, and perhaps one of the main reasons in where the fund came out with this new facility. And this facility was supposed to provide financing for countries that are in a very peculiar position, where they're smaller than states like Barbados. We're small, but we have a relatively high income compared to other African countries. By international standards, we are high income countries, but we still are extremely vulnerable because of our size and our positioning. And therefore, but we don't get, because of income, the access to that climate financing, concession financing for build climate resilience, to do the roof programs that we're trying to do, to put pipes on the ground and replace our mains. That sort of non-sexy economic investment. We don't get financing that because of our economic position where you're high income. And therefore, this This resilience and trust, sustainability trust facility provide financing for that. Why is that so important? Because that financing is long-term financing. This, as opposed to standard fund IMF financing, this one is a 20-year loan with a 10-year grace period. And I have my coffee for the morning yet. 10-year grace period, 20-year loan, about 2%. No, you're not going to find that anywhere. And that facility is supposed, that funding from IMF supports government's policy to build climate resilience within this context of the economy. It will support the Roof to Roof program. It will support, it's not, so what they will do, they look at the climate policy of the country and see what it is you're planning to do. And if more funds come to that, then government spends it doing those things. Help support the Roof to Roof programs, helping with the mains issue, pipes, water. There's different things to be done. So that's how you build resilience. Building resilience, both on the fiscal, let's say, the economy, the climate, on your debt, building those buffers is what will help us. If you get, it's not if when you get the next crisis, but it seems the crisis is not the already there, you can be able to buffer it a bit and quickly recover.
Coming back now to BERT 2.0 or BERT 2022. One of the things that should have happened under the first BERT program was the transformation of several state-owned enterprises. We know what happened with COVID, and a lot of this was delayed. How big of an issue, or how big of a burden, I should say, are SOEs on government finances? A lot of them are in serious financial straits.
Well, you go back to the beginning. When we first started the BERT program, BERT 2018, one of the main problems on fiscal was the SOEs. That had grown over the last decade. So we have over 90 SOEs. The transfers, so there's four categories under fiscal spending: wages and salaries, goods and services, transfers to SOEs, and capital spending. And under normal circumstances, your wage and salary is supposed to be highest, followed by your goods and services, or your capital expenditure, because that's what's going to get you the growth. This is get, but when we started work program, transfers to SOEs were the largest by a huge margin, and that's why you see that we started with a bottom-up approach where we had the online survey of all Barbadians, and we have a tremendous response there in terms of what services you find essential, optional, or can be provided elsewhere. That survey allowed us to craft, at that time, with the social partnership, a SO reform program. And that's what helped us to do the work with Transport Board in terms of new buses, Sanitation Authority and refleeting that, KIPO in terms of the online stuff, the Kills about this in terms of leasing out program there. A lot of work has been done. Sometimes I think we focus too much on the half empty glass approach as opposed to the half full. A tremendous amount of work on SOEs were completed on the BERT 2018. But as you rightfully said, the pandemic put a pause on all that. We are not where we were prior to BERT 2018, where transfers to SOEs are much smaller than they were, but it's not where we want to be yet. In addition, it's not to say the SOEs have debt. Some SOEs have financial issues. So we got to be careful what we say. They don't have a debt, don't have financial issues. And that is because we haven't completely restructuring that and those. And that is a key component of the program. Those reforms of the form and structure, looking to see what can be provided through public sector, what services can be restructured differently in use of more efficient means of delivery, electronic digitizing and more electronic use of electronic media, etc. That is going to be important to make those institutions fit for purpose and reduce the reliance on government, freeing up fiscal space that government can now use to do further the capital expansion that is planned on the BERT 2022. We've already provisioned on the BERT 22 based on the path of the primary balance, a space for government to invest in the economy about $500 million each year to get the growth we need to get. The space from the reform would give additional to do even more. So it's extremely critical the SOE reform, not only because the efficient delivery service to make Barbados a first class country in terms of in public sector delivery of services, but also the fit for ensure greater fiscal sustainability. And it's part of the thing, what you mentioned earlier in terms of building resilience ambassadors for the next shock. So it's all part and parcel and very critical work that has to be done.
But let me ask you this: how difficult is it in reality to privatize a government agency, an SOE?
I don't know of any SOE that government is trying to privatize. I don't know that. There may be some SOEs where a particular service that they're delivering can better be delivered through a private arrangement, and then perhaps even using some of the same people to provide some of the same words to provide that, thereby enfranchising them and empowering them. That's the concept that we started under when we were looking at the first work program. Privatizing people is like enfranchising people. So that's the concept behind the TAP program, for example, where persons, provide services to government in terms of the bus. So it's not that you just privatize. Maybe some services, or maybe there are, but that's not what I was talking about.
Okay. Now, getting back to the concern about debt, you said at present is about 125% to GDP and continuously coming down. But you cannot fault Barbadians for having concern about the debt that we are in. We are borrowing massive amounts of money from the IMF.
No, we are not. You're absolutely not. I can't fault you say I can't fault Bobby people for thinking what they want to think. But what I can do is provide correct information. We're not borrowing too much money. And I think economists and those who are in position need to be able to explain properly. Look, under the BERT 2018 program, the 4 years on the BERT 2018, government borrowed in total $2.5 billion. You would say that's a lot, right?
Of course it is.
Good. Government also paid back $3.7 billion. You knew that?
Yes, I did.
Good. That is a net reduction in debt. You can't listen, any financial person would tell you, Lisa, you can't go and build a house without borrowing, unless you may be fortunate. But most
Might have
average people
savings.
have to get a mortgage, unless you got your savings to build a house. Even then, you probably use the banks for mortgage and use the savings for investment. That's how people make money. How you get wealth. No country can go out borrowing, Lisa. You have to borrow. This is a misnomer. Every country, even the richest country in the world, they borrow. The trick is how do you borrow? What kind of borrowing you do? So I told you that on the BERT program, government borrowed $2.5 billion, but pay back 3.7. That's a net reduction in debt. So you can't say government borrowed. That's a picture. So the debt was 18 billion, is now 13 billion. Is that too large? As a ratio of GDP, it was 176, it's now 125. Is that too large?
It's still high.
This is the metric which, so yes, it's still high, but is it manageable, Lisa? Is it sustainable, Lisa? I wouldn't argue it's still high, but is it manageable and it's sustainable, Lisa? Let me think about it. Let me understand it properly. And you must recognize 13 is far less than 18. But that's not the metric, is over the income, which is the GDP. And that's what we use for international comparison. And I can explain what I've said before, why we use that. Because, if your income is 100,000 and you borrow 9,000, you're indebted, 9%. But if another person income is 10,000 and borrow 9,000, they're in different indebtedness. So we use a ratio. Now, at 125% of GDP, it's still relatively high. But first, it's on its way down. And secondly, why is it that before the pandemic it was 117% of GDP and was projected closer to 100 billion? Because in the pandemic it stepped up because the denominator, the GDP, contracted by 14%, almost 2 billion. Then you do math, the numerator, the denominator. If a denominator gets small and all of a sudden the ratio is larger than it will have been, it's a denominator effect. So am I worried then? How do you fix the problem? Do you go and say, well, let's move it 13 billion to 10 billion? Okay, that can work. But then you're hurting yourself because you're not going to got the funds. Every country must borrow. Or do you deal with the denominator? You deal with the denominator effect. You deal with the denominator effect by doing the base. Let back the 14% of GDP we lost. Without doing anything, that's going to reduce that ratio probably down to 110% of GDP. Without doing anything. Secondly, let's grow the economy beyond the what we had in prior to the pandemic. Let's move from a $10 billion economy to 11, 12, $13 billion economy. Now, all of a sudden, $13 billion in debt divided by a $13 billion economy is less than 100% of GDP. Continue to grow the economy. This is why the same way the economy contracted because of COVID, I believe it will grow. And it will continue to grow. So instead of focusing and saying that is the problem, government borrowing, which is not correct analysis, let's focus on the problem and say, how do we get the growth we needed to carry us where we need to go? All of a sudden, that is not a problem. In a personal example, how do you move from having that $10,000 income with to manage your $9,000 debt? So you have $100,000 income. All $9,000 is not here, not here for you. That's why we have as economists to get out there and explain. Governments will always borrow. Manage your repayments in such a manner that you can easily repay even if it's a shock. So prior to the program, we were paying 68 cents, paying 30 cents out of every dollar. That's a manageable position to be in. At least 70 cents for you to do wages, goods and services, capital investment. And if a shock happened, you can ease off of some things and still service that is manageable. Right? Those are the parameters to look at. If you look at those parameters, you can only come to one conclusion. That while still relatively high, is extremely manageable, it's not a problem, it's on a sustainable path. More importantly, let me give you a final point here. And I tell you because now put on my IMF hat. If you look at the IMF report, so each report we have had, there's a part in the report, after each report that says you have to pay. There's a table in there that analyzes the ability to repay. And if the assessment at any point in time is that the country can't repay, then the IMF doesn't lend. So the fact that you have an IMF program that we were very successful in completing that supported our Birth 2018 program, that they have assessed the debt to be extreme, to be sustainable. And the country's ability to repay was not compromised in any form or fashion.
After 4.5 years working with the government through extremely challenging circumstances, which were made worse as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, do you have any regrets? Or should I say, do you think you could have done things differently?
No, please, no regrets. Wouldn't have done anything differently. In fact, I feel very privileged and blessed, honored to be able to that God put me in a position I could come and contribute to my country at a time when it's really needed, and to use the talents and skills He have given me in order to help my fellow Barbadians. So I feel honored and privileged. Being part of the team, we were able to accomplish quite a lot with the very limited resources we have, and I think this because the majority of people and even everybody all what literally play a role and support the program. One of our strengths is the social partnership that we have, where labor, employers, private sector can sit around a table and not endorse, not everybody agree, but at the end of the day, have a collective understanding of the direction you have to go in. Many countries don't have that. Most countries don't have that. And it makes it difficult for economic policies to become effective, or it reduce the efficacy of such policies and make it so. Our student partnership is a gem that should be treasured, and I think that is what enhance it. But me, in terms, I feel really honored to have given the 4.5 years back to my country.
What are your predictions for the Barbados economy for 2023? If you could be bold enough to make any predictions.
I, I my prediction for Barbados economy is strong growth in 2023. 2023 is going to be one of the best years on record, but we have to work together. We have to not ease up, but continue to press in terms of trying to get that growth, get the reforms, get the investments going.
Barbados is in another agreement with the International Monetary Fund. You are back with the International Monetary Fund. Will you maintain a relationship with Barbados? Is that allowed?
No, that's not possible. So once you're IMF staff, you cannot work on your own country. You can have no involvement whatsoever in terms of policy advice. So, but even more important, you won't have the time. I go and take up another country now. I get reintegrating IMF in terms of policy analysis, in terms of there's a lot of the world is so much work happening. There's so much to be done all over the world in terms of response. The IMF response in terms of the resistance trust program, it's just one, but there's so much work to be done and things. So even if I wanted, I'm so busy that it won't be next to impossible. That's why I leave from the IMF. And when you take leave, you are literally detached from the IMF. I'm not doing IMF work in the last 1.5 years. All I have for IMF was my email, in case anyone don't reach me. I couldn't have access to none of the systems, internet, nothing like that. I was just none outside the IMF. My connections, I was still on staff. But even then, they weren't paying me. The last 4.5 years, there was no contribution to my pension. I lost my pensionable years with that. Um, so, but all in all, it was a good sacrifice. I would do it again. I think it was very rewarding.
Dr. Greenidge, it has been an absolute pleasure meeting and chatting with you over the last few years. I'm sure Barbadians appreciated your no nonsense approach and never shying away from criticism, as well as your ability to break down some complex financial matters without all the economic jargon for the average person. I want to wish you and your family God's richest blessings as we head into 2023.
And thank you, Lisa. Again, it was a pleasure. I've had a very nice working relationship with the media, including yourself, especially. We've done at least 2 or 3 times. And so I want to thank you for that. And thank you for having me on today. And God bless you. And then all the best for 2023.
Thank you once again. That was senior economist with the International Monetary Fund and former senior economic advisor to the Barbados government, Dr. Kevin Greenidge, whose stint with us has come to an end. And as we come to the end of 2022, let me wish you and your family, on behalf of my colleagues, God's richest blessings going into 2023. Do have yourself a wonderful evening.